All right, today I'm here with Nile of nocode.tech and Concrete Capital. Nile and I don't know each other at all, so let's get into it. Let's change that.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Sure. Why don't you give me a rundown of what you're working on? Because I know we were chatting back and forth, and you said you're about 6 months ahead of us. So I'm very eager to hear what's around the corner for us, because right now I feel like I'm sitting in the middle of like a dumpster fire, and it's just like, chaos all around me, and I'm hoping that that calms down in a couple months.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right. That's kind of what it's been like for me for as long as I can remember now. So, uh, so I guess like in terms of how I got into micro private equity and sort of what I'm doing now, um, for the last few years, I've had a kind of corporate career, worked for a bank, etc. And I'd done a little bit of kind of startups and stuff before that. But yeah, for the last kind of 5 years up until a couple of months ago, I was kind of full time consulting, working in corporate, doing all those kind of things. And I'd been trying to start startups on the side quite a few times, and kind of quite often I would, come up with an idea, try and get a little bit of traction on it, and then take it from there. And I don't know if it was maybe I don't know if I had this realization. It was a realization somewhere around 2018, where I read a few things out there by people like Justin Mayers, Ryan Culp, etc. Just as this kind of term micro private equity was starting to emerge, and I sort of had this idea of, well, instead of starting companies while I'm already trying to do a full-time job, why don't I just buy them and grow them? Because to be honest, the growth bit is a bit that I enjoy a little bit more anyway. As much as I love coming up with ideas and I love growing ideas, I kind of don't like that bit in the middle where you're like, will anyone pay for this idea? How do I do it, etc.? Do I really want to spend 6 months building this, etc.? So yeah, I kind of dipped my toe in the water. I bought a couple of companies. One of them was nocodetech that you mentioned. One of them was Adam Network, and the reason I say I was 6 months or a year or whatever it may have been ahead of you is when I read, I don't know if we should blog your newsletter kind of fairly recently, but I read it and you guys were talking about things like, it's quite difficult to juggle several projects at once and all that kind of thing. And that has absolutely been my experience. So nocode.tech is easily the most prolific project I'm working on at the minute. It's a massive no code site. It's got education, it's got tools, etc. Ranks number one in Google for no code, tons of other terms. It's doing pretty well. And I kind of thought at the time I was going to buy that and just sort of, have it for a few months, stick some sort of course on it and it would make money. Actually, I ended up buying it just as no code took off as a term in 2018, and that sort of brought its own challenges. So yeah, when I kind of say, I feel I'm a little bit ahead of you, a lot of the problems that you're running into now are definitely ones that I felt, kind of 2019, 2020.
Yeah, and in terms of nocode.tech, I mean, I can't tell exactly what this is, but it's like a kind of an education site, almost like oh, what's that guy who has Ben Tossel, MakerPad?
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
almost like a MakerPad competitor.
Yeah, pretty similar. So we brought out education really really recently. Up until now, it's been primarily, people come to the website, they find a tool that they want, they click out, we make some revenue based on that. Not quite affiliates, but something similar. Um, and then yeah, recently decided to actually turn it into an education site, which does pretty much bring it into direct competition with MakerPad, No Code MBA, companies like that.
And when you bought it, because I look at this and I think, are you a developer yourself? Do you code?
Yes.
Sweet. Okay. Because when I look at this and I think content, I come back to one of the stories of one of our partners who he's in private equity, and naively he's like he went to like Flippa or something and he bought a content site, right? And it was like, very clearly you could see the traffic just kind of like slowly dying. And he bought it thinking like, oh, well, great, I can juice this for a couple months, make my money back and a little bit of profit and like dip my toe in the water. And Google made an update and it went to like straight up zero, like very quickly, and he lost everything. So I look at these content sites and I think, man, it's a lot of work. Like who's doing all of this content stuff? Do you have a team that's doing this for you? Are you outsourcing it? How is that working?
Yeah, so that's essentially been a pretty big challenge. So in terms of how it works at the minute, myself, I've got one employee. Between us, we do a lot of the work. We also work with a content agency, and then we make use of a ton of automation to make the content kind of come to life, to collect data, etc. as well. So it's always been upkeep, and it's not just upkeep of the content; it's upkeep of how people discover the content on site, how they then, or sorry, off site, how they then navigate it on site, etc. And there's always been this kind of tension between, is this just a content site that I'm going to throw a crappy product on and sort of, go from there? Or actually, do we have a massive opportunity, right? We're number one for no code on Google in the middle of this massive no code trend. Actually, is there an opportunity here to build a bigger company? And so, that's kind of been a little bit of a journey here where at the very, very start, it was just a quick, yeah, let's throw some content on here, get a product on it. And actually now it's kind of become, more or less a full-time focus.
Interesting. Yeah. So you bought like I have, you've bought yourself a job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Built,
So
built
I mean,
myself several.
several jobs, exactly. Yeah, we've bought ourselves 3 jobs. But let's take a step back and go into just your overall all portfolio. I mean, it sounds like, and frankly, this happens. So I used to work at a venture studio, and this happened with us too. It's like in any pool of, in any batch of companies or whatever, where there's competition involved, some are going to win and some are going to lose. And the tendency is to take the winners, right, run with them and just kill the losers.
Mm.
And I naively, perhaps at the beginning of this, I was looking at micro private equity and buying stuff with cash flow already as a way to mitigate that, right? So like maybe my thinking was back then, maybe micro acquisitions are not subject to power laws, right? If you're buying something that's already kind of working, there's no guessing, right? You should be able to do some kind of better prediction than you could with a company making zero versus making, I don't know, 5, 10K in MRR a month. You should be able to predict like some kind of growth rate, but I don't know that that's the case. It may turn out actually that even in a portfolio of profitable companies, you have power laws too there, where there's just inevitably one that kind of takes off and their growth rate is, I mean, we have one right now in our portfolio too. It's like we get like 100 users a day that sign up for that thing, and it's still running on this like single DigitalOcean instance, right? It's like $20 a month to run the whole. It's like the most profitable, highly growing product we have, right? And yeah, then we have some that are just like, struggling, right? They get a couple users a day. We can hold it for 3 years and make our money back and a good profit, right? Maybe like double it, but it's going to take a while.
Yeah, I think this is the thing that's interesting about micro private equity. There's a few things here, I think ultimately we badge all the different ways of doing micro private equity under that single term at the minute, but almost that they can be very, very different. So the way I've approached it is twofold. Number one, so I own two companies at the minute, and I bought both of them at pretty low prices. One of them, four figures, high four figures, and the other one. Quite low five figures, so nothing absolutely huge. I'm not dropping six figures here. However, it's also just me. I've got an employee in each company, not like an operator, more, for a specific task relevant to each company. But what I don't have is, I'm not a team of people. I'm not sitting here with a big, checkbook buying five companies at once and going, okay, if one or two of them works, brilliant. If the other ones don't, too bad. And actually, both of those things can be considered micro private equity, but they're quite different journeys. It's like what you said earlier. I've essentially bought a job because I kind of had to make a bit of a decision point, and I made it sort of when lockdown started last year, where I was kind of like, you know, there's two ways to run these companies. I can either run them as somebody who's running two companies, giving them equal attention, equal growth, yada yada yada, or I can kind of say, right, I've got that one company there. It's churning along, it's growing very very slowly. Could it be a lot more if I put effort into it? Absolutely, but actually, I've got this no code company here, and it looks like that could potentially be a massive company. Do I go all in on that? And if I was a bigger private equity outlet, I probably wouldn't make that decision. I'd probably just say, well, a bet's a bet. I've got several of them. That's it. It's a different, several things that are different. Risk, etc. But essentially, I'm now in this kind of weird place where I've picked one company to kind of be the full time gig. And so, as much as it started out as this attempt at micro private equity, in some ways, the second company's become sort of a side project again, you know. And I sort of, my vision for the future is that no code grows to a point where it doesn't require it to be a full-time job for me anymore, or it sells or something like that, whatever it might be. And as a result, I always kind of default back to that private equity. In the future, if I think about, okay, this is a full-time job, but how do I grow wealth longer term? It is more back to that sort of genuine private equity model.
Yeah, there's a couple things I'd love to unpack there. The first is, I mean, maybe we're trying to bootstrap a private equity company, which is like objectively kind of a stupid thing to do, right? Like that's a very hard task. So it's no surprise that both of us are kind of getting stuck operating these things that we didn't initially anticipate we would actually be operating, right? Because I mean, for us, we have 4 people in our buying group. Um, None of us are on it full time. Um, and I think that right now we're taking a look at what it would look like to find an operator for each company. So we've obviously stepped in, and frankly, it's like each one of these projects, we buy it, the code kind of sucks, like it's definitely not going to scale. So there's a huge engineering effort. It's not actually enough cash flow to like sometimes even hire like Upwork people. So we have to do some of it ourselves, a lot of it ourselves, I should say. One of them we bought was 6 figures. So there's like a little bit of more cash flow to be able to hire like a developer from India, right? Like, we've leveled up to that point, which is nice, but still a lot of overhead in terms of project management, right? We have to like really, really look at the code so that we don't get end up in a worse spot than we're already in. But yeah, I mean, I think that the model for us, if we can figure it out, is to this initial portfolio, like we bought 3 just with our own cash to kind of prove a model, and I think later this year we're gonna raise a fund to try and move up stack, like $1 million fund where we may even just buy one, to be honest with you. Because if you buy, like let's say it's $1 million and you get like 200 grand of cash flow ish. I don't know if we can get that in this market, but I don't know. Let's just make that assumption. At least with 200 grand, right? You're like, okay, I could find some local kind of recent graduate or something, somebody super hungry, kind of put them in as like a junior CEO and have them just go execute all day, every day on this one product, and have us kind of run traffic interference in the background. So it's almost like we're going to be going from 100% we're operating it to like a kind of junior CEO where we're like very involved still, like overseeing almost every detail, but we don't have to spend our execution hours against each particular property. And then eventually, if we can take that $1 million fund and bootstrap it into like a $5-10 million fund after, we show some kind of success, then we get out of these problems, right? But I don't know how to solve them in kind of this like true micro SaaS where you're talking about like under 6 figures or right around 6-figure acquisitions. It's just tough. There's just not that much cash flow to kick off. Like I think we initially thought we would buy it, great, there's cash flow. We can do all this fun stuff with cash flow, right? We're going to be, like Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, just shit's going to be kicking off cash flow. And like, we're just going to be buying other stuff with that cash flow. It's like, no, you're giving most of that cash flow to like developers or fucking Heroku or AWS or something like that. There's like $80 left over at the end of the month, and you're like, okay, well, I'm not going to take a $20 distribution. Like that's stupid. But yeah, it's a tough spot.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think first of all, a big lesson learned for me is I wouldn't buy another company without also having a percentage of the capital allocated to hiring someone for at least the first year to run it. And that's not even going into do I need a developer, etc. I mean, literally, it's okay. This is your problem now. I'm going to pay you for that to be your problem, but you're the operator. That's definitely a big lesson because I think otherwise, yeah, you're absolutely you're buying a job. It's the same as I don't know, going out and starting a cafe or something like that, where it's this kind of thing that's just there are so many things going on that you have to be intensely all over it. A big learning for me is okay, if I think I can afford, let's say, 100K, I'm actually going to only buy a company for 50 because I'll spend the other 50 hiring someone, whatever it might be. Um, I think the interesting thing here is, and I have a few thoughts on the engineering sort of side, but the interesting thing here is that there's a bit of I guess a school of thought in micro private equity of, should these be treated like companies? And what I mean is, should you be in there as a founder sort of personality, thinking about all aspects, you know, trying to look for unique strategies, unique playbooks for each company, or do you need to find a way to commodify it? Do you need to find a way for it to be like real estate? Doesn't matter where you buy real estate, right? Everything's the same. You can flip it, you can rent it, you can put a new bathroom in, etc. Um, and so, there's a thought process in my head of how do you find a cohort of companies that are worth buying where you can apply fairly standardized playbooks. So, I can just buy this and say, I'm just going to throw paid ads at this and it'll work or it won't work. Or buying a company where there is a growth channel that's working. And obviously those are hard to acquire, but, buying a company where there is a growth channel that's working, but you can simply put a lot more fuel in the fire than someone else can, which of course then brings you back to, well, why don't you just be an angel or something like that, etc. But I think there's just this tension between um, we as people in the micro private equity space would really like there to be a, a real estate type approach to this where you can take a commodified playbook and then that is sort of balanced against, I just don't know if that's possible with a company. I don't know if the complexity is too high.
Yeah, I was, I'll abstract the names because I haven't gotten their permission to share some of these things, but I was talking to, I've just been investigating how the bigger guys do it, right? Like how does SureSwift do it? How do some of these other guys do it? How does Tiny Capital do it? And somebody mentioned that their playbook for after they acquire it is like, one, I got the sense that on the smaller side, unless the company can support an engineering team, the actual private equity firms themselves haven't really solved any kind of engineering problems, meaning there's no real shared resources between companies. Like we bought, each product had a different coding language, which is just, in hindsight, just obviously stupid. But they haven't really solved the engineering problem in the sense that like they're going to have to move up stack almost by definition because they're going to need to use the money, the cash flow, or whatever additional capital to pay for engineering. On the growth side, though, what I did find encouraging was that they said that the most of the time their playbook is just pulling very, very obvious levers, right? Like, what is conversion? Is that an industry standard conversion? If not, right, this is like a flow chart, then we're working on conversion until that number comes up, right? Okay, what's next? Does our Google ads like revenue positive for us? Can we make our money? Can we make our money back doing those things? Yes or no, right? Okay, so do the same thing for LinkedIn. Do the same thing for Facebook. Does cold email work, right? Like all of those kinds of things are in my mind, it was, I always joke that I only have like mediocre revelations these days, but that was like one of the more profound mediocre revelations that these guys are just, even at the bigger scale, pulling on very, very obvious levers. And one thing that I do think, like, I know it's easy to get bogged down in like, oh, do we buy it or do we build it, even at this small level? When we're buying stuff, we have one product that was like an XYC company. And what's great is that motherfucker gets traffic, right? It gets 200 people a day, right? And I have stuff to go play with. I have data to go, manipulate and change and try and like run experiments, right? Because the real problem for me when I go to build stuff is, you don't know if it's going to work for sometimes like a year. Like I got super lucky recently with the productized service. That's like a small marketing agency. And again, naively, I thought, oh, great, we'll buy these companies. I'll run them through like my growth marketing agency and boom, like, money will fall from the sky. And of course, like we haven't even gotten a chance to test that thesis out yet because we've just been like, solving fires on the engineering side, just trying to keep like the servers up and like moving it to like a real production, like high availability stuff. But yeah, that was and I don't know. I took it to heart and that they were just pulling on very obvious levers to get growth. So I think that you're right. I think that there is a kind of playbook that could be copied relatively simply. Like I don't know that you could full on like outsourced executive assistant from the Philippines run growth for an entire like company making a few thousand a month. I don't know if it's that replicable, but it didn't seem like too far off from that.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately, that's kind of it. Yeah, you've always got to look for obvious levers, and quite often they're there. Whenever I've looked at a company before I've even approached, I always try and have 5 or 10 different things, even if only 2 or 3 of them are really the ones I would do. But 5 or 10 different things that I would go for. But I think the tricky bit with it is, unlike a different investment, like if I have a house, right, other than buying a house that ends up being a total wreck, right, you've got to go right back to the walls. Um, it can only go so wrong. Okay, if I need to go in and do the bathrooms, maybe I've also got to do the pipes, but then that's kind of it. Whereas with a company, it might be, okay, conversion's not working. Okay, that's because the positioning's not right, but actually it's not that the position's not right, it's that we're sending the wrong customer. And then suddenly you just kind of go, right, if you buy the wrong business and go down that rabbit hole, you've suddenly um, is that a solvable problem? Absolutely. But can you solve 5 of those at the same time? That's a bit harder. It's a bit more expensive. It's kind of that, you just keep pulling. And one of the things that, and this, I don't know if this is maybe controversial on, Twitter, MPE, Silicon Valley type circles, etc. But I just don't think I would buy a company for the engineering ever again. I think if I was ever to buy a company now, I would go in with the assumption that I'm going to throw out all the tech, and all I want is the existing brand, the existing distribution, etc. And actually, I would even go a step further and say the next company that I'm likely to buy will simply be something that adds more distribution to the existing companies that I have.
Yeah.
But when I look at engineering problems, you've mentioned a lot of them, but I mean, take any engineer, right? Who actually likes editing someone else's code? Nobody.
Nobody.
So you got to go in, you got to understand it. You end up reworking bits of it, and then suddenly, it's like, again, I'll go back to the house analogy. Anytime you do a renovation, you change one thing, and then you're like, oh, I got to paint this wall, I got to do this, and suddenly, one task turns into three. And I think it's so easy to do that when you're buying tech for the tech. And I think, obviously I run a no-code site, so I've got to say this, but I do think tech is becoming a lot more commodified. There are now a lot more people who can build things, but there are still a massive dirge of people who can, grow and market them and sell them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. The hard part though is with some of these products, it's actually way harder to, like, if you're buying something, say it's a pure SaaS product, you're buying something and it has users. Building against, even if you're replatforming, right, and say like changing, programming languages and writing it in like the stack that you prefer, doing a migration against something that already has existing users that really don't want any downtime at all is such a harder problem than just almost going from scratch, right? Because you're starting from scratch, but you also have these really weird constraints about like how somebody else organized the database. And frankly, like even for the ones that we rewrote, we didn't get around that, right? Like it was just going to be too painful to like do a total like restructure of the database and all that shit. It was like, fuck it, we'll just, whatever. We're going to make it as good as we can get it. It's fine, and then move on. But you're right. I mean, maybe it's the case that I know the move that in 5-10 years, when the tech catches up, the no code tech catches up, the move is going to take a product, buy a product that was unprofitable with 5 engineers, rebuild it in no code, and it will be profitable with like one no code engineer, citizen developer, or whatever the fuck they're going to call themselves 5 years from now. That will be the move, right? And like that's going to work great. I don't know. I don't have a confidence level that I could take, for example, Toybox, which does like bug reporting feedback. Like that is a Chrome extension, like, back end, front end, I think could maybe get on like a bubble. I worry about like, I don't know where the ceiling is for that stuff. That's where my comfort level with no code ends, is like, I'm totally cool with it as an MVP, but I'm totally uncool with it the second that it's done and I have like scaling problems. I just immediately regret. And I'm like, fuck, I wish I just would have spent the extra 2 weeks to build it in code. But obviously over time, that's going to move up to the point where it's just not an issue anymore. But I don't know, that would be kind of a cool move to think about, is like, maybe we just take this new rewrite that we have to do, which, I mean, that's very real, right? We're like going out and getting specs for a full carte blanche rewrite. And also just get one from a Bubble developer and say like, hey, what could you do? What could you do in Bubble today in like 3 weeks, right? That would be pretty sweet.
Yeah, and I think, I think that is going to be a lot closer than 5 years. You can argue all day about the scaling of stuff. Where I kind of find the problem with no code is it's not can it scale to handle X number of users or anything like that, but it's how many little compromises do you need to make? How many little daft things here and there have you got to compromise? To fit within a tool. Webflow. So we use the WAM stack. So Webflow, your table member stack, Zapier, for um, nocode.tech, and I've been up till about 3 in the morning the last 3 nights working on a big kind of re-platform for some of the stuff. And it's just little things that can be difficult on a tool like that. For example, if I want to filter something by name, I can't say this name includes these letters. I've got to say it's either this word or that word. It's
Mhm.
just silly little things like that. Now, not every tool has those restrictions or those problems, but I think the difficulty is, I work on no-code tools every day. I talk about them every day. I've used no-code for 8 years, so I can easily look at most software and say that can be done in no-code, or it can, but it's going to have a massive caveat or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's just sort of a skill I've learned. I'm not sure how easily it comes to other people. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So I look at a lot of these now and I go, yeah, I could definitely do that without code, or I definitely couldn't. But the way I kind of think about it, I mean, I looked at acquiring a product in 2020 at one point, and I just pictured myself like sitting for the first time, like downloading the code, trying to get it up and running again, trying to make it work on my machine, and I just thought, that's not what I want to do. I really just don't want to do that. Maybe in the future I'll hire someone to take care of that, but I I just think for me really the absolute ideal purchase is, and this is an obvious thing again, kind of like what you said earlier with obvious revelations, but the most ideal purchase for me is a product that is as little as possible. And I'd like to buy a newsletter that's got a big audience and income. Of course, who wouldn't, right? But I just want to have the least exposure to tech possible now, because to me it just feels like it's such a cost center. I don't mind having exposure to a complicated marketing framework because there's so much I can optimize there to make more money or whatever it might be. But tech's just a nightmare. And I say this is, I mean, I've been coding now for 15 years, something like that. So
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. Well, this was a great conversation. We're coming up on time. I think two of the things I didn't get to is maybe we'll do a round two. One, liquidity on the sell side. I would just be curious to get your opinion next time. And then also too, I just love the idea of having like, I don't know what you'd call it, but no code tech is like kind of your anchor product. And you're going to start building, it's almost like a quasi roll-up strategy around it. Like, how do I make the mothership, your no code tech, bigger? Right, by
mm,
acquisition, which is a very tried and true playbook. I mean, like accountants have been doing that shit since 1492, right? Buying the competition, right, and like rolling it up into one big entity. Whereas for us, I don't think that we've found that yet. We've bought three quite disparate products that don't really have anything to do with each other, which is just a different kind of strategy. But I think we'll have to get to that next time. But thanks so much for your time now, and it's actually really great meeting you. Thanks for chatting.
I appreciate it. Thanks very much. And we'll speak again soon.
Right on.